22. The Ice Pick. Downtown, I went first to police headquarters. McGraw was holding down the chief's desk. His blonde-lashed eyes looked suspiciously at me, and the lines in his leathery face were even deeper and sourer than usual. "When did you see Dinah Brand last?" he asked, without any preliminaries, not even a nod. His voice rasped disagreeably through his bony nose. 10:40 last night, or thereabout, I said. Why? Where? Her house. How long were you there? 10 minutes, maybe 15. Why? Why what? Why didn't you stay any longer than that? What, I asked, sitting down in the chair he hadn't offered me, makes it any of your business? He glared at me while he filled his lungs so he could yell, "Murder!" in my face. I laughed and said, "You don't think she had anything to do with Noonan's killing?" I wanted a cigarette, but cigarettes were too well known as first aids to the nervous for me to take a chance on one just then. McGraw was trying to look through my eyes. I let him look, having all sorts of confidence in my belief that, like a lot of people, I looked most honest when I was lying. Presently, he gave up the eye study and asked, "Why not?" I was weak enough. I said, "All right, why not?" indifferently, offered him a cigarette and took one myself. Then I added, "My guess is that Whisper did it." "Was he there?" For once, McGraw cheated his nose, snapping the words off his teeth. "Was he where?" "At Brand's." "No," I said, wrinkling my forehead. "Why should he be, if he was killing off Noonan?" "Damn Noonan!" the acting chief exclaimed irritably. "What do you keep dragging him in for?" I tried to look at him as if I thought him crazy. He said, "Dinah Brand was murdered last night." I said, "Yeah? Now will you answer my questions?" "Of course. I was at Wilson's with Noonan and the others. After I left there, around 10:30, I dropped in at her house to tell her I had to go up to Tanner. I had a halfway date with her. I stayed there about 10 minutes, long enough to have a drink. There was nobody else there unless they were hiding." "When was she killed, and how?" McGraw told me he had sent a pair of his dicks, Shep and Vanneman, to see the girl that morning to see how much help she could and would give the department in copping Whisper for Noonan's murder. The Dicks got to her house at 9:30. The front door was ajar. Nobody answered their ringing. They went in and found the girl lying on her back in the dining room dead with a stab wound in her left breast. The doctor who examined the body said she had been killed with a slender, round, pointed blade about 6 inches in length at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Bureaus, closets, trunks, and so on had apparently been skillfully and thoroughly ransacked. There was no money in the girl's handbag or elsewhere in the house. The jewel case on her dressing table was empty. 2 diamond rings were on her fingers. The police hadn't found the weapon with which she had been stabbed. The fingerprint experts hadn't turned up anything they could use. Neither doors nor windows seemed to have been forced. The kitchen showed that the girl had been drinking with a guest, or guests. 6 inches, round, slim, pointed. I repeated the weapon's description. That sounds like her ice pick. McGraw reached for the phone and told somebody to send Shep and Vanneman in. Shep was a stoop-shouldered tall man whose wide mouth had a grimly honest look that probably came from bad teeth. The other detective was short, stocky, with purplish veins in his nose and hardly any neck. McGraw introduced us and asked them about the ice pick. They had not seen it, were positive it hadn't been there. They wouldn't have overlooked an article of its sort. "Was it there last night?" McGraw asked me. I stood beside her while she chipped off pieces of ice with it. I described it. McGraw told the Dicks to search her house again and then to try to find the pick in the vicinity of the house. "You knew her," he said when Shep and Vanneman had gone. "What's your slant on it?" "Too new for me to have one," I dodged the question. "Give me an hour or two to think it over. What do you think?" He fell back into sourness, growling, "How the hell do I know?" But the fact that he let me go away without asking me any more questions told me he had already made up his mind that Whisper had killed the girl. I wondered if the little gambler had done it, or if this was another of the wrong raps that Poisonville police chiefs like to hang on him. It didn't seem to make much difference now. It was a cinch he had, personally or by deputy, put Noonan out, and they could only hang him once. There were a lot of men in the corridor when I left McGraw. Some of these men were quite young, just kids. Quite a few were foreigners, and most of them were every bit as tough-looking as any men should be. Near the street door, I met Donner, one of the coppers who had been on the Cedar Hill expedition. "Hello," I greeted him. "What's the mob, emptying the can to make room for more?" "Them's our new specials," he told me, speaking as if he didn't think much of them. "We're going to have a augmented force." "Congratulations," I said, and went on out. In his pool room, I found Pete Murray, sitting at a desk behind the cigar counter talking to three men. I sat down on the other side of the room and watched two kids knock balls around. In a few minutes, the lanky proprietor came over to me. "If you see Reno sometime," I told him, "you might let him know that Pete the Finn's having his mob sworn in as special coppers." "I might," Murray agreed. Mickey Linehan was sitting in the lobby when I got back to my hotel. He followed me up to my room and reported, "Your Dan Rolfe pulled a sneak from the hospital somewhere after midnight last night. The Crokers are kind of steamed up about it. Seems they were figuring on pulling a lot of little pieces of bone out of his brain this morning. But him and his duds were gone. We haven't got a line on Whisper yet. Dick's out now trying to place Bill Quint. What's what on this girl's carving? Dick tells me you got it before the coppers." The telephone bell rang. A man's voice, carefully oratorical, spoke my name with a question mark after it. I said, "Yeah?" The voice said, "This is Mr. Charles Proctor Dawn speaking. I think you will find it well worth your while to appear at my offices at your earliest convenience." "Will I? Who are you?" "Mr. Charles Proctor Dawn, attorney at law. My suite is in the Rutledge Block, 310 Green Street. I think you will find it, well, mind telling me part of what it's about?" I asked. "There are affairs best not discussed over the telephone. I think you will find—" "All right," I interrupted him again. "I'll be around to see you this afternoon if I get a chance." "You will find it very, very advisable," he assured me. I hung up on that. Mickey said, "You were going to give me the what's what on the Brandslaughter." I said I wasn't. I started to say it oughtn't be hard to trace Rolfe, running around with a fractured skull and probably a lot of bandages. Suppose you try it. Give Hurricane Street a play first. Mickey grinned all the way across his comedian's red face, said, "Don't tell me anything that's going on. I'm only working with you," picked up his hat and left me. I spread myself on the bed, smoked cigarettes end to end, and thought about last night. My frame of mind, my passing out, my dreams, and the situation into which I woke. The thinking was unpleasant enough to make me glad when it was interrupted. Fingernails scratched the outside of my door. I opened the door. The man who stood there was a stranger to me. He was young, thin, and gaudily dressed. He had heavy eyebrows and a small mustache that were coal black against a very pale, nervous, but not timid face. "I'm Ted Wright," he said, holding out a hand as if I were glad to meet him. "I guess you've heard Whisper talk about me." I gave him my hand, let him in, closed the door, and asked, "You're a friend of Whisper's?" "You bet." He held up two thin fingers pressed tightly together. "Just like that, me and him." I didn't say anything. He looked around the room, smiled nervously, crossed to the open bathroom door, peeped in, came back to me, rubbed his lips with his tongue, and made his proposition. "I'll knock him off for you for $50,000. "Whisper?" "Yep, and it's dirt cheap." "Why do I want him killed?" I asked. "He unwomaned you, didn't he?" "Yeah?" "You ain't that dumb." A notion stirred in my noodle. To give it time to crawl around, I said, "Sit down, this needs talking over." "It don't need nothing," he said, looking at me sharply, not moving toward either chair. "You either want him knocked off or you don't." "Then I don't." He said something I didn't catch down in his throat and turned to the door. I got between him and it. He stopped, his eyes fidgeting. I said, "So Whisper's dead." He stepped back and put a hand behind him. I poked his jaw, leaning my 190 pounds on the poke. He got his legs crossed and went down. I pulled him up by the wrists, yanked his face close to mine, and growled, "Come through. What's the racket?" "I ain't done nothing to you." "Let me catch you. Who got Whisper?" "I don't know nothing." I let go one of his wrists, slapped his face with my open hand, caught his wrist again, and tried my luck at crunching both of them, while I repeated, "Who got Whisper?" "Dan Rolfe," he whined. "He walked up to him and stuck him with the same skewer Whisper had used on the twist. That's right." "How do you know it was the one Whisper killed the girl with?" "Dan said so." "What did Whisper say?" "Nothing. He looked funny as hell standing there with the butt of the sticker sticking out of his side. Then he flashes the rod and puts two pills in Dan just like one, and the both of them go down together, cracking heads. Dan's all bloody through the bandages." "And then what?" "Then nothing. I rolled him over and they're a pair of stiffs. Every word I'm telling you is gospel." "Who else was there?" "Nobody else. Whisper was hiding out, with only me to go between him and the mob. He killed Noonan himself, and he didn't want to have to trust nobody for a couple of days till he could see what was what, except in me." "So you, being a smart boy, thought you could run around his enemies and pick up a little dough for killing him after he was dead?" I was clean, and this won't be no place for Whisper's pals when the word gets out that he's croaked, Wright whined. I had to raise a getaway stake. How'd you make out so far? I got a century from Pete and a century and a half from Peak Murray for Reno, with more promise from both when I turned the trick. The whine changed into boasting as he talked. I bet you and I could get McGraw to come across, too. And I thought you'd kick in with something. They must be high in the air to toss dough at a woozy racket like that. I don't know, he said superiorly. It ain't such a lousy one at that. He became humble again. Give me a chance, Chief. Don't gum it on me. I'll give you $50 now and a split of whatever I get from McGraw if you keep your clam shut till I can put it over and grab a rattler. Nobody but you knows where Whisper is. Nobody else except Dan. That's as dead as he is. Where are they? The old Redmond warehouse down on Porter Street, in the back, upstairs. Whisper had a room fixed up with a bed, stove, and some grub. Give me a chance. $50 now and a cut on the rest. I let go of his arm and said, I don't want the dough, but go ahead. I'll lay off for a couple of hours. That ought to be long enough. Thanks, Chief. Thanks. And he hurried away from me. I put on my coat and hat, went out, found Green Street and the Rutledge block. It was a wooden building, a long while past any prime it might ever have had. Mr. Charles Proctor Don's establishment was on the second floor. There was no elevator. I climbed a worn and rickety flight of wooden steps. The lawyer had 2 rooms, both dingy, smelly, and poorly lighted. I waited in the outer one while a clerk who went well with the rooms carried my name in to the lawyer. Half a minute later, the clerk opened the door and beckoned me in. Mr. Charles Proctor Don was a little fat man of 50-something. He had prying, triangular eyes of a very light color, a short, fleshy nose, and a fleshier mouth whose greediness was only partly hidden between a ragged gray mustache and a ragged gray Van Dyke beard. His clothes were dark and unclean-looking without actually being dirty. He didn't get up from his desk, and throughout my visit he kept his right hand on the edge of a desk drawer that was some 6 inches open. He said, my dear sir, I am extremely gratified to find that you had the good judgment to recognize the value of my counsel. His voice was even more oratorical than it had been over the wire. I didn't say anything. Nodding his whiskers as if my not saying anything was another exhibition of good judgment, he continued, I may say in all justice that you will find it the invariable part of sound judgment to follow the dictates of my counsel in all cases. I may say this, my dear sir, without false modesty, appreciating with both fitting humility and a deep sense of true and lasting values my responsibilities, as well as my prerogatives as a... And why should I stoop to conceal the fact that there are those who feel justified in preferring to substitute the definite article for the indefinite, recognized and accepted leader of the bar in this thriving state? He knew a lot of sentences like those, and he didn't mind using them on me. Finally, he got along to, thus, that conduct which in a minor practitioner might seem irregular becomes when he who exercises it occupies such indisputable prominence in his community, and I might say not merely the immediate community, as serves to place him above fear of reproach. Simply that greater ethic which scorns the pettier conventionalities when confronted with an opportunity to serve mankind through one of its individual representatives. Therefore, my dear sir, I have not hesitated to brush aside scornfully all trivial considerations of accepted precedent, to summon you, to say to you frankly and candidly, my dear sir, that your interests will best be served by and through retaining me as your legal representative. I asked, what'll it cost? That, he said loftily, is but of secondary importance. However, it is a detail which has its deserved place in our relationship and must be not overlooked or neglected. We shall say $1,000 now. Later, no doubt. He ruffled his whiskers and didn't finish the sentence. I said I hadn't, of course, that much money on me. Naturally, my dear sir, naturally, but that is of not the least importance, in any degree, none whatever. Any time will do for that, any time, up to 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. At 10 tomorrow, I agreed. Now I'd like to know why I'm supposed to need legal representatives. He made an indignant face. My dear sir, this is no matter for jesting, of that I assure you. I explained that I hadn't been joking, that I really was puzzled. He cleared his throat, frowned more or less importantly, said, "It may well be, my dear sir, that you do not fully comprehend the peril that surrounds you, but it is indubitably preposterous that you should expect me to suppose that you are without any inkling of the difficulties, the legal difficulties, my dear sir, with which you are about to be confronted, growing, as they do, out of occurrences that took place at no more remote time than last night, my dear sir, last night. However, there is no time to go into that now. I have a pressing appointment with Judge Leffner. On the morrow I shall be glad to go more thoroughly into each least ramification of the situation, and I assure you they are many with you. I shall expect you at 10 tomorrow morning." I promised to be there and went out. I spent the evening in my room drinking unpleasant whiskey, thinking unpleasant thoughts, and waiting for reports that didn't come from Mickey and Dick. I went to sleep at midnight.